The nightmare always started the same way. Sand, heat, the roar of helicopter blades cutting through a rocky sky. Greer Ashford's hands slick with blood that wasn't hers pressing down on a chest wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. The young Marine's eyes looking up at her, trusting fading, her voice hoarse from screaming for medevac. The dust storm rolling in like God's own curtain, closing the scene before she could finish the story, before she could save him. Greer woke with a gasp in the cramped cab of her Ford F-150, parked at a rest stop somewhere between Wyoming and Idaho. Her shirt was drenched, her hands were shaking, and Ranger, her 7-year-old German Shepherd, was already pressed against her chest, applying that steady grounding pressure he'd been trained to provide back when they both wore the uniform. "I'm okay," she whispered, though they both knew it was a lie. Ranger didn't move. His weight stayed firm against her sternum, his breathing slow and deliberate, a metronome pulling her back from Fallujah, 2004, to a cold Montana rest stop in the present day. The dog's dark eyes never left hers. No judgment, no pity, just presence. That's what 15 years as a Navy hospital corpsman taught you. Presence mattered more than promises. Greer ran her fingers through Ranger's thick black and tan coat, feeling the familiar texture of his tactical vest, the worn handle she'd grabbed 100 times when the world tilted sideways. He was retired now, like her. Both of them scarred, both of them trying to figure out what came after war. "Thanks, buddy," she said finally. Ranger's tail thumped once against the passenger seat. Agreement. He shifted back to his position, sitting upright with military posture, ears forward, scanning the dark parking lot like he was still on patrol in Kandahar, instead of watching over a broken corpsman who couldn't sleep through the night. Greer checked her phone. 4:17 in the morning. The glow of the screen hurt her eyes. She had 3 missed calls from a Denver number she didn't recognize, and 1 voicemail she hadn't listened to yet. She'd been ignoring it for 2 days. The last thing she wanted was more bad news. But the truck's gas tank was nearly empty. Her bank account showed $83, and the letter sitting on her dashboard had words that didn't make sense no matter how many times she read them. She picked up the envelope again. Heavy paper. Expensive. The kind lawyers used when they wanted you to know they were serious. Brennan and Associates Law Firm, Denver, Colorado. Dear Miss O. Ashford, we regret to inform you of the passing of Elias Ashford. As his sole living relative, you have inherited the Silverwood Inn in Clearwater Valley, Idaho, along with the surrounding 40 acres and all associated property rights. Estimated value of the estate exceeds $200 million. Please contact our office immediately to begin the transfer process. $200 million. Greer had read that line maybe 50 times, and it still felt like a punchline to a joke she didn't understand. She was living in her truck. She'd been fired from her last paramedic job 3 months ago after a panic attack mid-shift left her frozen in the back of an ambulance, while her partner handled a cardiac arrest alone. Her savings were gone. Her future was a question mark written in red ink. And now some lawyer was telling her she'd inherited a fortune from an uncle she hadn't seen in 20 years. Uncle Elias. The memory came back slow, fragmented, like trying to recall a dream. She'd been maybe 8 years old, her father's older brother. Tall, quiet, always in work clothes that smelled like wood smoke and pine. He ran a hotel somewhere up in the mountains, though Greer's father never talked about it. Never talked about Elias at all after the falling out. He made his choices, her father used to say, voice tight with something Greer didn't understand back then. We made ours. And then Elias was just gone. No Christmas cards, no phone calls, a ghost in the family tree. Until now. Greer folded the letter and stuffed it back in the envelope. Ranger watched her with those intelligent brown eyes, head tilted slightly to the left. His tell, the gesture he used when he knew she was about to make a decision she'd regret. "Don't look at me like that," Greer said. Ranger's expression didn't change. She started the truck. The engine coughed twice before catching a sound that made her wince. The mechanic in Laramie had told her the timing belt was going. $1,500 to replace it. Money she didn't have. Another problem she'd been ignoring. "We're just going to look," she told Ranger as she pulled back onto the highway. "Sign the papers, sell the place, get enough money to fix the truck, and find a real apartment. That's it." Ranger turned his attention to the window, watching the dark landscape roll past. His tail stayed still. No agreement this time. The drive into Idaho was quiet. The sun came up slow over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber that reminded Greer of the desert. She tried not to think about that. Tried to focus on the road, the white lines, the rhythm of the tires on asphalt. But the memories leaked through anyway. They always did. By the time she crossed into Clearwater Valley, it was mid-morning. The GPS led her down a two-lane highway that wound through dense pine forest, the trees so tall they blocked out half the sky. The towns got smaller, the houses farther apart, civilization thinning out until it was just her, the truck, and thousands of acres of wilderness that didn't care whether she lived or died. She liked it better that way. Clearwater itself wasn't much. A main street with maybe a dozen buildings, half of them boarded up. A post office, a general store with a faded Coca-Cola sign, a diner called Jolene's with a gravel parking lot and curtains in the windows. The kind of place where everyone knew everyone and strangers stood out like blood on snow. Greer parked in front of the diner. Her stomach was empty, her head was pounding. And she needed coffee before she dealt with whatever was waiting for her at the Silverwood Inn. Ranger hopped down from the truck, his movements economical, controlled. He wore his tactical vest, the faded tan fabric marked with patches from deployments Greer tried not to remember. People sometimes asked if he was a service dog. She never corrected them. It was easier than explaining that Ranger was a retired military working dog, the K9 who'd done 3 tours in Afghanistan sniffing out IEDs and keeping Marines alive. Easier than explaining that they'd both come home broken. The bell above the diner door chimed when Greer pushed it open. The smell hit her immediately. Bacon grease, coffee, pique, the scent of small-town America, the kind of place that hadn't changed in 40 years and didn't plan to. 3 people sat at the counter. All of them turned to look. Greer kept her expression neutral. Eye contact, nod. Moved to a booth in the back, standard protocol for avoiding conversation. Ranger followed at her heel, his body language calm but alert. He settled beside the booth, sitting at attention, eyes scanning the room with professional efficiency. Not a pet, a soldier waiting for orders. The waitress approached slowly. Late 60s, maybe early 70s. Steel gray hair pulled back in a bun. Kind eyes. The name tag on her apron read Jolene. Coffee, Jolene asked, her voice carrying the soft drawl of someone who'd lived in the mountains her whole life. Please. Jolene poured without comment, her gaze flicking to Ranger, then back to Greer. He's beautiful. Working dog. Retired military K9. Thought so, Jolene smiled. My late husband was Army. I can always tell. She set the pot down. You just passing through, or you here for a reason? Greer wrapped her hands around the coffee cup, letting the heat seep into her fingers. Looking for the Silverwood Inn. The diner went quiet, not sudden, not dramatic, just a subtle shift in the air, like everyone had taken a breath at the same time and forgotten to let it out. Jolene's smile faded. You family? Yeah. Elias's niece. Greer nodded. Jolene's expression softened. She pulled out a chair and sat down across from Greer without asking permission. Up close, Greer could see the deep lines around her eyes, the weathering of a hard life lived in a hard place. I'm sorry for your loss, Jolene said quietly. Elias was a good man, best man I ever knew, truth be told. I didn't really know him. No, I don't suppose you did. Jolene glanced at the other customers, then back to Greer. But he knew you, talked about you sometimes, said you were Navy, said you served. I was a corpsman. He was proud of that. Said you understood things most people don't. Jolene leaned forward, her voice dropping. Listen, honey, I don't know what brought you back here, but you should know something before you go up to that hotel. What's that? It's not what it looks like. Greer waited. Jolene chose her words carefully. Elias didn't run that place for money. He ran it for a different reason. A better reason. And there are people in this valley who didn't like that. People who wanted him to sell, wanted him to walk away. He wouldn't. What kind of people? The kind who smile when they threaten you. Jolene stood picking up the coffee pot. The Silverwood's about 6 miles north on Forest Road 12. Can't miss it. Big old building, 3 stories, needs paint. Been closed up since Elias passed 2 months back. Thank you. Jolene started to walk away, then stopped. One more thing. If that dog of yours starts acting strange up there, you listen to him. Animals know things we don't. My husband used to say that all the time, and he was right more often than not. She walked back to the counter, leaving Greer alone with her coffee and the uncomfortable weight of a warning she didn't fully understand. Ranger shifted beside her, his ears twitching. Greer looked down. The dog was staring at the door, his body tense in a way she recognized. Alert. Focused. The same posture he used before finding an IED. What is it, boy? Ranger's gaze didn't waver. Greer turned to look. Through the window, she could see a black Mercedes sedan pulling into the parking lot. Expensive, new, completely out of place in this town of rusted pickups and 30-year-old Subarus. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out. Late 40s, maybe 50, well-dressed, charcoal suit, polished shoes. The kind of man who measured success by the price of his watch. He looked at the diner, then at Greer's truck. Then he smiled. Greer felt something cold settle in her stomach. The man walked toward the diner with the confidence of someone who owned every room he entered. The bell chimed. He scanned the space, his eyes landing on Greer with the precision of a missile finding its target. "Ms. Ashford," he said, his voice smooth, practiced. "What a coincidence. I was just on my way to find you." Ranger stood, not aggressive, just present. A living wall between Greer and the stranger. The man noticed. His smile widened. "Beautiful animal. German Shepherd?" "Who are you, Callum Thorne. I'm an attorney representing the Ashford Family Trust." He extended his hand. Greer didn't take it. Callum lowered his hand without missing a beat. "I understand you've been contacted about the Silverwood property. I wanted to reach out personally before you made any decisions you might regret." "I haven't made any decisions." "Good. That's good." Callum glanced at Jolene, who was watching from behind the counter, her expression unreadable. He lowered his voice. "Perhaps we could speak somewhere more private." "I'm fine here." "Of course," Callum's smile never wavered. "Then let me be direct. The Silverwood Inn is a complicated asset. There are tax implications, structural issues, environmental concerns. It's not the windfall the Denver firm made it sound like." "I'm listening." "I represent a group of investors who are interested in purchasing the property. We're prepared to offer you $250,000. Cash. Clean transaction. No lawyers. No headaches. You sign the papers, you walk away with enough money to start fresh somewhere else." Greer studied him. The suit, the smile, the way his eyes stayed locked on hers, reading her reactions, calculating his next move. "That's generous," she said. "It is. But the letter I got said the property is worth $200 million. Callum's smile flickered, just for a second. "That's an inflated estimate based on mineral rights that may or may not exist. The actual market value is significantly lower. And given the condition of the building, you'd be lucky to get half of what we're offering." "Then why do you want it?" "Sentimental value. The investors I represent have ties to the area. They want to preserve the history." Greer took a sip of her coffee. It was cold now. "I'll think about it." Callum's expression hardened just slightly, the mask slipping. "Ms. Ashford, I'm trying to help you. You're a veteran. You served your country. You deserve better than to be buried under the weight of a crumbling hotel in the middle of nowhere." Ranger growled, low, controlled, a warning. Callum took a step back. "Perhaps I should let you consider my offer, but I'd encourage you not to wait too long. Opportunities like this don't come around twice." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, setting it on the table. "Call me when you're ready to be reasonable." He walked out. The Mercedes started. Gravel crunched under expensive tires. And then he was gone. Jolene came over with the coffee pot, refilling Greer's cup without asking. "That's the kind of people I was talking about." "He's persistent. He's dangerous." Jolene's voice was flat. "Elias told me once that the worst kind of evil is the kind that smiles at you while it destroys everything you love. That's Callum Thorne. He's been trying to get that property for years. Your uncle wouldn't sell, and now he thinks you will." "What's really out there?" Greer asked. "At the hotel." Jolene was quiet for a long moment. "Truth, I don't know. Elias never told me everything. But I know he protected it. I know he died protecting it. And I know he left it to you for a reason." Greer looked down at Ranger. The dog had settled back into a sitting position, but his ears were still forward, his body still tense. "You ever been up there?" Greer asked. "Once, long time ago. Before the fire." "Fire. 1978. Someone tried to burn the place down. Elias saved most of it, but his wife didn't make it out." Jolene's eyes went distant. "After that, he changed, got quieter, stopped letting people in. But he never stopped running that hotel. Never stopped helping people." "What kind of people?" "Veterans, mostly. Men and women who came back from war and couldn't find their way home. He'd let them stay. No charge. Just gave them a place to rest, to heal. Called it his mission." Something twisted in Greer's chest, a recognition she didn't want to feel. She paid for the coffee and stood. Ranger rose immediately, moving to her side. "Thank you," Greer said. "Be careful up there," Jolene replied, "and listen to that dog." The drive to the Silverwood Inn took 15 minutes on a dirt road that wound deeper into the forest. The trees pressed in on both sides, their branches forming a canopy that blocked out the sun. The temperature dropped. The light turned gray. Ranger sat in the passenger seat, his posture shifting from relaxed to alert as they climbed higher into the mountains. Then the road curved and the hotel appeared. Greer stopped the truck. The Silverwood Inn rose 3 stories into the Idaho sky, a massive structure of wood and stone that looked like it had been carved out of the mountain itself. The roof sagged in places. Half the windows were broken. The paint had peeled away in long strips, exposing gray wood beneath. Vines crawled up the eastern wall like veins on an old hand. It should have looked abandoned, but it didn't. It looked like it was waiting. Greer killed the engine. The silence that followed was absolute. No birds, no wind, just the ticking of the cooling truck engine and her own heartbeat in her ears. Ranger jumped down his movements, careful, controlled. He didn't run ahead like a normal dog would. He moved like a soldier entering hostile territory. Nose up, ears forward, scanning. Greer followed her boots, crunching on gravel that hadn't been disturbed in months. The circular driveway was overgrown with weeds. The front steps creaked under her weight. One of the boards snapped, and Ranger immediately pushed against her legs, steering her away from the weak spot. "Good boy," she whispered. The front door was locked. Greer tried the handle twice, then stepped back. She could break in, force it. But something made her hesitate. Ranger had already moved away from the main entrance. He was padding along the porch, nose to the ground, tracking something Greer couldn't see. He stopped at the far end, where the porch wrapped around to the side of the building. He sat, looked back at her, waited. Greer walked over. Ranger was staring at a section of the wall where the wood planks didn't quite line up. She pressed her hand against it, and the panel shifted, revealing a narrow gap just wide enough for a person to slip through. "You've been here before, haven't you?" Greer said quietly. Ranger's tail wagged once. Agreement. She squeezed through the gap, Ranger following close behind. The passage led to a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Greer pulled out her phone, using the flashlight to illuminate the steps. They were old, wooden, each one groaning under her weight. At the bottom, the passage opened into the hotel's basement. It was vast, cluttered. Decades of forgotten things piled against the walls. Old furniture, broken chairs, crates stacked on crates, and everywhere dust. Thick layers of it, undisturbed like snow that had been falling for years. Ranger moved through the debris with purpose, his nose working, following a scent only he could detect. He weaved between rows of abandoned furniture until he reached a long shelf covered in cobwebs. He barked. Once. Sharp. Commanding. "What is it, boy?" Ranger pawed at a collapsed stack of cardboard boxes leaning against the bottom of the shelf. Greer pushed them aside. Behind the debris, tucked against the wall, was an old military footlocker. Olive green metal, dented around the edges. The latches were rusted but intact. Greer crouched, her heart pounding. She recognized the style. Gulf War era, early 90s. The kind of trunk soldiers used to store their gear when they shipped overseas. She clicked the latches. They snapped open with a sound that echoed through the basement. The lid creaked upward. Inside were yellowed papers, maps, keys with hand-etched numbers, and a leather-bound ledger, its cover worn, its pages swollen with age. Greer lifted the ledger carefully. The title was carved faintly into the leather. The Healers. She opened it. The first page was filled with beautiful handwriting. Old-fashioned, the kind taught in schools before computers. It wasn't a business ledger. It was a journal, a record of people who had stayed at the Silverwood Inn. But the entries weren't about money or reservations. They were about lives. Mrs. Patterson stayed 4 nights, left stronger than she arrived. Sergeant Collins' Army, 3 tours. Found rest here, moved on renewed. David Hughes' widower, 8 meals with staff. Laughed for the first time in months. Page after page. Stories, observations. People helped quietly without fanfare. A sanctuary disguised as a hotel. Greer's hands trembled as she turned the pages, watching the entries grow shorter, stranger. The chamber is older than the hotel. The family won't understand. My time is ending. Hers is beginning. And then on the final page, written in shaking handwriting that looked like it had been penned by someone running out of time, to Greer, who served, "Follow the dog. The truth is yours to finish. What we protect is not wealth. It is purpose. You will understand when you need to. Trust Ranger. He knows the way." Greer's breath caught. Ranger was sitting beside her, his brown eyes locked on hers. Steady, certain. Like he'd been waiting his entire life for this moment. "How did he know?" Greer whispered. "How did Uncle Elias know about you?" Ranger didn't answer. He just stood, turned, and walked deeper into the basement, toward a section of wall where the concrete looked different, newer. Greer followed the ledger clutched in her hands. The wall was smooth, unmarked. But when Greer ran her fingers along the surface, she felt it. Faint scratch marks, tool marks. A straight line almost like the outline of a doorway that had been sealed over. Ranger sat in front of it, his posture rigid, alert. Somewhere above them in the hotel wood groaned, not the settling of an old building, something else. Movement, footsteps, slow, deliberate, crossing the warped floorboards of the first floor. Greer killed her phone's flashlight, plunging them into darkness. Ranger pressed against her leg, his breathing silent, his body coiled. Another creak. Closer now. Then the sound of a doorknob rattling, a door opening, closing, silence. Long, heavy, suffocating. Greer counted the seconds in her head. 30, 40, 60, nothing. Ranger finally exhaled, though his posture stayed tense. Greer turned her flashlight back on the beam, cutting through the dark. She scanned the basement one more time, her mind racing. Someone had been here. Someone was watching. And Ranger had led her to something Uncle Elias had hidden. Something important enough to seal behind concrete. She tucked the ledger into her jacket and moved back toward the stairs. Ranger followed his eyes, never leaving the sealed wall, like he was memorizing it, like he knew they'd be back. When they reached the surface, the cold mountain air felt like a gulp of freedom. Greer pressed her back against the outside wall of the hotel, her heart pounding, her hands shaking. Ranger stood beside her, his ears forward, scanning the forest. The sun was starting to sink behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Beautiful, peaceful, a lie. Greer looked back at the dark windows of the Silverwood Inn. Whatever secrets this place held, they weren't going to give themselves up easily. But Uncle Elias had left her a guide, a partner who'd served in war zones and come home broken just like her. She knelt beside Ranger, resting her forehead against his. "You knew we'd end up here, didn't you?" Ranger's tail thumped once. Greer stood, pulled out her phone, and looked at Callum Thorne's business card. $250,000. A clean exit, a chance to walk away from all of this. She thought about the ledger, the stories of people who'd found healing in this place. Veterans who'd come home from war and couldn't find peace anywhere else. People like her. She put the card back in her pocket without calling. "Come on, Ranger," she said quietly. "Let's find somewhere to sleep. We've got work to do tomorrow." They walked back to the truck as the last light faded from the sky. And somewhere into the forest, hidden in the shadows between the trees, something watched them go. Greer woke to the sound of rain hammering against the truck's roof. Gray light filtered through the windshield, turning the world outside into a watercolor painting of pine trees and mist. She'd parked in a pullout half a mile from the hotel, unable to bring herself to sleep any closer to that dark building with its sealed walls and phantom footsteps. Ranger was already awake, sitting upright in the passenger seat, watching the tree line with the patience of a soldier on watch. He didn't turn when Greer shifted, didn't break his concentration. Whatever he was monitoring out there in the rain-soaked forest, it held his complete attention. "See something?" Greer asked, her voice rough from sleep. Ranger's ear flicked back. Acknowledgement. But he didn't look away from the trees. Greer rubbed her face, feeling the familiar ache in her joints that came from sleeping in a vehicle. She was too old for this. 43 and living in a truck like some kind of vagrant. The thought should have stung more than it did, but she'd passed shame somewhere around month 2 of unemployment. Her phone showed 6:23 in the morning. No service, no messages, just the photo on her lock screen, a picture from 12 years ago. Greer in desert camouflage, arm around a young Marine who'd be dead 3 days after the photo was taken. She kept meaning to change it, never did. The ledger sat on the dashboard. Even in the gray morning light, the worn leather seemed to pulse with importance, like it was waiting for her to understand something she'd missed. Greer started the truck. The engine caught on the second try, a small mercy. She needed coffee, food, and she needed to find Vernon Lattimore, the man Jolene had mentioned yesterday. The caretaker who'd worked for Uncle Elias for 40 years. If anyone knew what was really going on at the Silverwood Inn, it would be him. The drive back to town was slow, the rain turning the dirt road into a river of mud that pulled at the truck's tires. Twice, Greer felt the rear end slide the vehicle, fighting her for control. Both times, Ranger shifted his weight, leaning into the turn, helping to balance the truck with the precision of someone who'd ridden in worse conditions. By the time they reached Clearwater's main street, the rain had softened to a drizzle. The town looked even more abandoned in the gray light. No cars, no people, just empty storefronts and the tired weight of a place that had stopped hoping for better days. Jolene's diner was the only building with lights on. Greer parked and pushed through the door, Ranger at her heel. The smell of coffee and bacon grease hit her like a physical thing, making her stomach clench with sudden hunger. She couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten a real meal. Jolene was behind the counter pouring coffee for the same three men who'd been there yesterday. She looked up when Greer entered, her weathered face showing concern. "You look like you slept in your truck," Jolene said. "I did. Thought so." Jolene grabbed a menu. "Booth in the back, please." Greer settled into the same booth as yesterday. Ranger took his position beside her, sitting at attention, his tactical vest making him look every inch the military working dog he'd been. One of the men at the counter glanced over, started to say something about dogs not being allowed, then saw Ranger's posture and went quiet. Combat veterans recognized each other even across species. Jolene brought coffee and a plate of scrambled eggs, bacon, and toast without being asked. She set it down in front of Greer, then pulled out a chair and sat. "You went up there," Jolene said, not a question. "Yeah. Find anything interesting?" Greer thought about the footlocker, the ledger, the sealed wall, the footsteps in the empty hotel. "Maybe, a Vernon Lattimore." "Vernon," Jolene's expression softened. "Sure, he lives about 2 miles east of here. Old cabin past the lumberyard." "Why?" "I need to talk to him. About Elias, about everything." Jolene nodded slowly. "Vernon was Elias's right hand for as long as I can remember. If you're looking for answers, he's got them. But fair warning, honey, Vernon doesn't talk much, and he definitely doesn't trust strangers." "I'm not a stranger. I'm family." "That might make it worse." Jolene stood, refilled Greer's coffee. "Eat, you're going to need your strength." Greer ate mechanically, her mind elsewhere. The eggs tasted like sawdust, the bacon like cardboard. Everything filtered through the exhaustion and anxiety that had become her constant companions since leaving the Navy. Ranger watched her eat, his expression impossible to read. But when she slid him a piece of bacon, he sniffed it once and turned away. Refused. "Really," Greer said. "You're judging Jolene's bacon now." Ranger's eyes shifted to the window, alert again, focused on something outside. Greer turned to look. A pickup truck was pulling up to the diner. Old, rusted, the kind of vehicle held together by duct tape and stubbornness. The driver's door opened, and an elderly man climbed out slowly, favoring his left leg. He was maybe 70, maybe 80, hard to tell. The mountains aged people in ways that had nothing to do with years. He wore faded jeans, work boots, and a canvas jacket that looked older than Greer. His face was a road map of wrinkles and weather damage, but his eyes were sharp, aware. He limped toward the diner, paused at the door, and looked directly at Greer through the window. Then he came inside. The bell chimed. The man didn't acknowledge the others at the counter. He walked straight to Greer's booth, his gait uneven but determined. Up close, she could see the calluses on his hands, the scars on his knuckles, a lifetime of hard work written in scar tissue and joint damage. "You're the niece," he said. His voice was gravel and cigarettes rough enough to sand wood. "Greer Ashford." "Vernon Lattimore." He didn't offer his hand. "Figured you'd show up eventually. Elias said you would. He talked about me." "Some." Vernon glanced at Ranger. "Talked about the bun more. Said when you came, you'd have a shepherd with you. Said the dog would know things before you did." Greer felt something cold crawl up her spine. How could he know that? Elias knew a lot of things he shouldn't. Vernon pulled out a chair and sat down with a wince. "You went to the hotel." "How do you know?" "Because you're still here. If you'd just come to sign papers and sell, you'd have done it by now and left." Vernon's eyes were the color of old ice. "But you found something, didn't you?" Greer pulled the ledger from her jacket and set it on the table. Vernon's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. Recognition, maybe respect. "Where'd you find that?" "Basement, in a footlocker. Ranger led me to it." Vernon looked at the dog. Ranger stared back, unblinking. Some kind of understanding passed between them, silent and complete. "The healers," Vernon said quietly, touching the ledger's cover but not opening it. "Elias kept this like it was scripture. Every person who ever stayed at the Silverwood and found peace. He wrote their story, said it was important to remember. Said someday someone would need to know what that place really was." "What was it?" Vernon was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of decades. "After the Gulf War, I came home wrong. Couldn't sleep, couldn't work, couldn't look my wife in the eye without seeing things I'd done, things I'd seen. The VA gave me pills. The pills made it worse. I was 3 days away from eating a bullet when I heard about a hotel up in the mountains that took in veterans. No questions, no judgment, just a place to rest." He paused, his fingers trembling slightly against the ledger. "Elias gave me a room, gave me work, gave me time. He never asked me what happened over there, never pushed. Just let me exist until I could figure out how to be human again. Took me 8 months, but eventually I found my way back. And when I did, he asked if I wanted to stay. Help him run the place. Help other people like me. So you did. For 40 years. Vernon's jaw tightened. The Silverwood wasn't a hotel. It was a mission. Elias believed that everyone who served deserved a place to heal, not just physically, spiritually. He said war breaks something inside people that regular hospitals can't fix. So he built something different. Greer thought about the entries in the ledger, the careful documentation of healing. Lives rebuilt one quiet moment at a time. Why did he leave it to me, she asked. We barely knew each other. Because you're a corpsman. You understand what it means to put other people back together. Vernon leaned forward. And because he knew you'd need it as much as it needs you. The words hit harder than Greer expected. She looked away, blinking against the sudden sting in her eyes. Vernon continued, his voice gentler now. There's something else you need to know. The hotel isn't the whole story. There's more. Something Elias protected until the day he died. The sealed wall in the basement. Vernon's eyebrows lifted. You found that already? Ranger did. That dog's smarter than most people I know. Vernon pulled a set of keys from his pocket, selected one, and slid it across the table. This opens the honeymoon suite on the second floor. Inside, you'll find a safe. It's welded shut. Has been since 1978. The fire. Yeah, the fire. Vernon's expression darkened. Someone tried to burn the Silverwood down that year. Tried to destroy what Elias had built. He saved the building, but not his wife. She died in the smoke. After that, Elias sealed the safe. Said if the family ever came back, if they ever tried to take what was his, they'd find nothing. What's inside? I don't know. Elias never told me. But whatever it is, it's worth killing for. Your family's been trying to get their hands on it for decades. Greer thought about Callum Thorne, the expensive suit, the smooth voice, the offer that was too good to be true. Callum came to see me yesterday, she said. Vernon's jaw clenched. What did he want? To buy the property. Offered me $250,000. Did you take it? No. Vernon exhaled slowly, something like relief crossing his face. Good, because the second you sign those papers, the Silverwood stops being a refuge. It becomes a development opportunity. Condos, shopping centers, everything Elias fought against. Ranger shifted beside Greer, his ears swiveling toward the door. A second later, the bell chimed. Callum Thorne walked in. He was dressed more casually today. Dark jeans, expensive jacket, but the smile was the same, practiced, predatory. His eyes found Greer immediately, then shifted to Vernon. Mr. Lattimore, Callum said smoothly. I didn't expect to see you here. Vernon didn't respond. Callum approached the booth, his attention back on Greer. Miss Ashford, have you had time to consider my offer? I'm still thinking. Of course, but I hope you're not letting sentiment cloud your judgment. He glanced at the ledger on the table, his smile flickered. That's an interesting piece of history. May I? Greer pulled the ledger closer. No. Suit yourself. Callum's voice cooled by several degrees. I'm just trying to help you understand what you're dealing with. That hotel is a liability, structurally unsound, filled with asbestos. If someone gets hurt on that property, you're liable. And given your financial situation, I doubt you can afford the lawsuit. How do you know my financial situation? I'm an attorney. It's my job to know. Callum leaned against the booth. Let me be frank, Ms. Ashford. You're a former Navy corpsman living in her truck. You have $83 in your checking account. Your last employer terminated you due to mental health concerns. You're not equipped to manage a property this complex. Ranger stood slowly, his body sliding between Greer and Callum. The growl that built in his chest was low, controlled, dangerous. Callum took a step back, his professional mask slipping just enough to show annoyance. Is that dog safe? He's a retired military working dog, Greer said quietly. He's trained to detect threats, and right now he's detecting one. The diner had gone completely silent. Even Jolene had stopped, moving her hand frozen on the coffee pot. Callum straightened his jacket. I see. Well, when you're ready to have an adult conversation about your future, you know how to reach me. He started toward the door, then paused. One more thing. Your uncle died protecting something that wasn't his to protect. Don't make the same mistake. He left. The Mercedes started. Gravel crunched. Vernon waited until the sound of the engine faded completely before speaking. He's getting desperate. Why? Because time's running out, there's a clause in Elias's will. If you don't claim the property within 30 days of notification, it reverts to the family trust. And Callum controls the trust. How many days do I have left? 5. Greer's stomach dropped. The letter said I had to contact the Denver firm immediately. And you didn't. Which means in 5 days, unless you formally claim ownership and file the proper paperwork, the Silverwood becomes Callum's. And everything Elias built dies with it. Ranger pressed against Greer's point. Solid. Grounding. Reminding her she wasn't alone. What do I need to do? Greer asked. Vernon pulled a business card from his wallet. Different from Callum's. Simpler. Local attorney in Boise. Call her, tell her I sent you. She'll handle the paperwork, but you need to do it today. And then what? Then you open that safe, find out what Elias was protecting, and decide if you're willing to fight for it. The rain had started again by the time Greer and Ranger left the diner. The forest road to the Silverwood was worse now, the ruts deeper, the mud thicker. Twice the truck's tires spun uselessly before finding purchase. Ranger rode in silence, his attention fixed on the trees sliding past. Alert, waiting. The hotel appeared through the mist like a ghost ship emerging from fog. Greer parked in the same circular driveway, killed the engine, and sat listening to the rain drum against the roof. Vernon's key felt heavy in her pocket. The honeymoon suite, a safe welded shut since 1978, secrets buried under layers of metal and time. You ready for this? Greer asked Ranger. The dog was already at the door waiting. They entered through the same hidden passage as yesterday. The basement was darker in the rain, the shadows thicker. But Greer had brought a proper flashlight this time, and the beam cut through the darkness with authority. The sealed wall looked the same. Unmarked. Innocent. But now Greer knew it was hiding something. A doorway. A passage. Something important enough to concrete over. Later. First the safe. The staircase to the second floor was in the main building. Greer had to force the front door this time, the lock finally giving way with a crack that echoed through the empty lobby. Inside, the air was stale and cold, carrying the smell of old wood and older memories. Dust covered everything. Furniture sat beneath white sheets like sleeping ghosts. The grand staircase rose into darkness, its banister carved from wood that had probably cost a fortune 100 years ago. Ranger moved ahead, testing each step before allowing Greer to follow. Twice he stopped, ears forward, listening to sounds only he could hear. Twice he moved on after determining there was no threat. The second-floor hallway stretched into shadow. Doors lined both sides, each one closed, each one holding its own history. Greer counted them as she passed. Room 201 and 202, 203, all the way to the end. The honeymoon suite. Vernon's key slid into the lock smoothly. The door opened with a groan that sounded almost human. The room beyond was larger than Greer expected. A 4-poster bed dominated the center, its frame hand-carved with intricate designs. Arched windows looked out over the forest. A fireplace made of river stone took up most of one wall, and in the corner, barely visible behind a collapsed section of wall paneling, was the safe. It was massive, commercial grade, the kind banks used before digital security. But someone had taken a welding torch to it, laying thick beads of metal across every seam, every joint. The door was sealed so thoroughly it looked like a single piece of solid steel. Greer ran her hand over the welds. Professional work, done by someone who knew what they were doing. He really didn't want anyone getting in here, she said quietly. Ranger sniffed the safe, then sat looking at Greer expectantly. I know, we need to open it. Greer pulled out her phone. No service. She'd have to drive back to town, find Vernon, get welding equipment, come back. That's when she heard it, a sound from downstairs. Not footsteps this time. Something else. A scraping. Metal on metal. Ranger's ears snapped forward. His body went rigid. Greer killed her flashlight. Darkness swallowed the room. She moved to the door, pressing her back against the wall, listening. The sound came again. Closer. Someone was in the hotel. She'd locked the front door behind her. Whoever this was had broken in through another entrance. Ranger moved to her side, his breathing silent, his body coiled, waiting for her command. Greer's mind raced through options. Confront them. Hide. Run. None of them good. She was alone in an abandoned hotel with a dog and no backup. If this was Callum or someone he'd sent if they meant harm, she had no way to defend herself. The scraping stopped. Silence filled the building like water rising. Then a voice called out. Female. Older. Familiar. Greer, you in here, Jolene? Greer exhaled, her muscles unclenching. She turned her flashlight back on and stepped into the hallway. Second floor. Jolene appeared at the top of the stairs, breathing hard, her gray hair plastered to her face from the rain. She looked at Greer, then at the honeymoon suite door. Vernon called me, Jolene said between breaths. Said you were coming up here. Said I should probably check on you. I'm fine. Are you? Jolene walked closer, her eyes taking in the sealed safe, the dusty room, Greer's tense posture. Honey, do you have any idea what you're stepping into? Not really. Then let me tell you a story. Jolene sat down on the bed, springs creaking under her weight. 1978. I was 32 years old, married, happy. My husband worked for the lumber company. Good job, good pay. Then the company started having problems. Environmental issues, workers getting sick. Nobody knew why. She paused, her eyes distant. Elias knew. He'd found something. Documents, evidence, proof that the company was dumping chemicals into the groundwater, poisoning the whole valley. He tried to go public, tried to stop it. That's when they came for him. Who's I am? The company, the lawyers, people like Callum Thorne's father. Jolene's voice hardened. They tried to buy him off, threaten him. When that didn't work, they tried to burn him out. The fire that killed his wife, that wasn't an accident. That was arson. Greer felt something cold settle in her chest. What happened? Elias survived, sealed up the evidence, sealed up the safe, and spent the next 40 years protecting what he'd found. Jolene looked at the welded metal. Whatever's in there, it's worth killing for. And Callum knows it. What is it? What's he protecting? I don't know, Elias never told me, but I know it's connected to the land. To what's under the Silverwood? Mineral rights, water rights, something valuable enough that the family's been trying to get it back for generations. Ranger moved to the window, his attention fixed on something outside. Greer joined him, looking out over the forest. At first she saw nothing, just trees and rain and mist, then headlights. 2 vehicles moving up the dirt road toward the hotel. Fast. We need to go, Greer said. Wait. Jolene pulled out her phone. She dialed, waited. Vernon, it's happening. She's at the hotel. Callum's coming. A pause. I will. Be careful. She hung up. Vernon's calling the sheriff, but it'll take him 30 minutes to get here. Then we leave now. No, Jolene's voice was firm. We stay. We make him show his hand, and we record every word. The vehicles pulled into the driveway. Doors opened. Voices carried up through the rain. Callum Thorne wasn't alone this time. He'd brought help. Greer looked at Ranger. The dog met her eyes. Steady, unafraid, ready. All right, Greer said quietly. Let's see what he wants. They went downstairs together, Jolene and Greer, and a retired military working dog who'd seen worse than corporate lawyers in expensive suits. The front door was already open. Callum stood in the lobby, flanked by 2 men in security uniforms. Not local, professional, the kind hired when you needed muscle that knew how to stay just on the right side of legal. Callum saw Greer descending the stairs and smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. Ms. Ashford, breaking and entering, I'm disappointed. It's my property. Not for another 5 days. Until then, it's in legal limbo, which means you're trespassing. He gestured to the security guards. I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to leave. No, I'm sorry. I said no. Greer reached the bottom of the stairs. Ranger positioned himself between her and the guards, his posture radiating controlled aggression. This is my uncle's hotel, my inheritance, and I'm not going anywhere. Callum's expression hardened, the mask finally dropping. You stupid woman, do you have any idea what you're doing? What you're risking? Why don't you tell me? Fine. Callum pulled a folder from his jacket. This property sits on top of one of the largest lithium deposits in North America, worth billions. Your uncle stole the mining rights through legal trickery 40 years ago. Those rights belong to the family trust, to me. Elias didn't steal anything. He protected it. From what progress, development, jobs? Callum's voice rose. This valley is dying, has been dying for decades. That deposit could save it, create employment, build a future. But your uncle was too self-righteous to see that. He chose his precious hotel over hundreds of families. Greer thought about the ledger, the stories of healing, the veterans who'd found peace in this place. He chose people over profit, she said quietly. That's not self-righteous. That's human. It's naive. Callum stepped closer. And now you're making the same mistake. Sign the papers. Take the money. Walk away. Or I'll make sure you lose everything. Ranger growled, low, dangerous. One of the security guards reached for his belt. Greer saw it in her peripheral vision. Saw the canister. Pepper spray. Don't, she said. The guard hesitated. That's a military working dog. He's trained to respond to threats. You spray him, he'll consider it an attack, and I won't be able to stop him. The guard looked at Callum. Callum studied Ranger, the dog's stance, the tactical vest, the complete absence of fear in his eyes. Stand down, Callum said finally. The guard stepped back. Smart choice, Jolene said from the stairs. She held up her phone. Because I've been recording this whole conversation. Trespassing threats, intimidation, attempted assault on a service animal should make for an interesting conversation with the State Bar Association. Callum's face went pale, then red. You're bluffing. Am I? Jolene hit a button. Callum's voice played back from the phone's speaker. This property sits on top of one of the largest lithium deposits in North America. The silence that followed was absolute. Callum's jaw worked, his hands clenched into fists. For a moment, Greer thought he might actually try something violent, but then he took a breath, smoothed his jacket, put the mask back on. This isn't over, he said quietly. Yeah, Greer replied, it is. Callum turned and walked out. The security guards followed. Doors slammed, engines started, gravel crunched under expensive tires, and then they were gone. Greer's legs gave out. She sat down hard on the bottom step, her hands shaking, adrenaline finally catching up to her. Jolene sat beside her. You okay? Yeah, I think so. That was brave. Stupid, but brave. Greer laughed. It came out shaky. Thanks. Ranger climbed onto the step between them, letting both women rest their hands on his shoulders, grounding them, keeping them present. Outside, thunder rumbled. The rain picked up. And somewhere in the forest, hidden beneath 40 acres of trees and soil and secrets, $200 million worth of lithium waited to be claimed. But all Greer could think about was the ledger, the healers, the people who'd found hope in this place. Vernon said I needed to open the safe, she said quietly. He's right. Jolene stood, offered her hand. Come on, I'll help you get the equipment, but we do it tomorrow when you're not shaking. Greer took her hand, let herself be pulled upright. Thank you. That's what neighbors do, honey. We show up when it matters. They walked out together into the rain. Ranger followed last, pausing at the door to look back at the dark hotel. His ears were forward, alert, like he could hear something the humans couldn't, something waiting, something patient, something that had been sealed away for 40 years and was finally ready to be found. The radio crackled to life at 4:17 in the morning, pulling Greer from a dreamless sleep that had lasted maybe 3 hours. She'd spent the night in Vernon's workshop behind his cabin, surrounded by tools and the smell of machine oil, preparing for what needed to be done at the hotel. Static, then a voice, crackling, urgent. All units, we have a report of a missing child. 8-year-old female Willa Foster, last seen near Forest Road 12 approximately 6 hours ago. Family was camping in the National Forest. Child wandered from campsite around 2200 hours. Search and rescue en route, but delayed due to weather conditions. Greer sat up fully awake. Forest Road 12. That was the road to the Silverwood. Ranger was already on his feet, ears forwarded, body tense. He'd heard it too. Recognized the tone, the urgency. He'd spent years responding to exactly this kind of call in Afghanistan, searching collapsed buildings for survivors. Vernon emerged from the back room, pulling on his jacket. His face was grim. They're saying the weather's getting worse. Storm front moving in faster than predicted. If that little girl's out there in this... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Greer was already lacing her boots. Her mind shifted automatically into corpsman mode. Triage, resources, timeline. An 8-year-old in the Idaho wilderness in November with a storm coming. Hypothermia would set in within hours. Maybe it already had. We should help, she said. Vernon nodded. I'll grab the medical kit. You know how to use a radio? Yeah. Good. Channel 7, that's search and rescue. He paused, studying her face. You sure about this? You don't owe these people anything. You've been here 2 days. Greer thought about the ledger, about all those stories of people who'd found refuge at the Silverwood, veterans who'd been given a second chance when they needed it most. Yeah, she said quietly, I'm sure. They loaded Vernon's truck with supplies, blankets, first aid, water, flares. Ranger jumped into the bed without being asked, his body language shifting into something Greer recognized from their time in service. Alert, focused, mission ready. The drive to the staging area took 20 minutes. The rain had turned to sleet, coating everything in a thin layer of ice that made the roads treacherous. Vernon drove with the confidence of someone who'd navigated these mountains for 70 years, but even he had to slow to a crawl on the steeper sections. The staging area was chaos. Sheriff's vehicles, volunteer fire department, families with flashlights and fear in their eyes. A woman in her mid-30s stood near a patrol car wrapped in a blanket, her face destroyed by terror and exhaustion. The mother. Greer recognized that look. She'd seen it in Fallujah, in Kandahar, in every place where parents realized they might never see their children again. The sheriff, a man in his 50s with a weathered face and kind eyes, was organizing search teams. He saw Vernon and walked over. "Vernon, didn't expect to see you out here. Got someone who can help." Vernon gestured to Greer. "This is Greer Ashford, Navy Corpsman, and that's Ranger, Military K-9, search and rescue certified." The sheriff's expression changed. Hope flickering where there had been only grim determination. "Can you serious? He's retired," Greer said. "But he's trained, and he's good." "Best I ever worked with," Vernon added. The sheriff looked at Ranger. The dog sat at perfect attention, rain beating on his tactical vest, eyes forward. Professional, unwavering. "We've got 3 teams out already," the sheriff said, "but visibility's dropping fast. If your dog can pick up a scent trail, we need him." Greer knelt beside Ranger, her hands finding the familiar texture of his vest. "You ready to work, boy?" Ranger's tail thumped once. Yes, the mother approached her movements, shaky, desperate. She held out a small pink jacket. "This is hers. She was wearing it yesterday." "Will it help?" Greer took the jacket gently. "What's your daughter's name?" Willa Foster." The woman's voice broke. "She's only 8. She's scared of the dark. If she's out there alone..." "We'll find her," Greer said. The words came automatically. The same promise she'd made 1,000 times in field hospitals and aid stations. Sometimes she'd kept it. Sometimes she hadn't. She held the jacket to Ranger's nose. The dog inhaled deeply, processing the scent, cataloging it, storing it somewhere in that remarkable brain evolution had given his species. Then he lifted his head, nose to the air, and turned toward the forest. He'd found something. "He's got it," Greer said. The sheriff grabbed his radio. "All teams, a K-9 unit has a potential trail. Stand by for coordinates." He looked at Greer. "I'm sending Deputy Collins with you. Radio protocol, safety." A young man in his 20s approached, clean-cut, nervous, too young to have seen much. Greer nodded to him. "Stay behind us," she said. "Don't interfere with the dog. He knows what he's doing." They moved into the forest as a unit. Ranger leading, Greer following, Vernon and the deputy bringing up the rear. The terrain was brutal. Steep slopes, dense undergrowth, trees so thick they blocked out what little light the storm-dark sky provided. Ranger moved with purpose, his nose tracking something invisible to human senses. He'd pause occasionally, recalibrate, then move on with renewed confidence. This was what he'd been bred for, what he'd been trained for. The years of retirement fell away like a shed skin revealing the working dog beneath. They'd been walking for maybe 40 minutes when Ranger stopped. His ears swiveled, his body went rigid, alert. Greer held up a hand, everyone froze. Ranger's nose lifted, he tested the air. Then he turned sharply to the left and started moving faster, pushing through brush that grabbed at his vest over rocks that would have turned a human ankle. "He's found something," Greer said into the radio. The deputy struggled to keep up. Vernon moved with surprising agility for a man his age, his limp barely slowing him down. The forest opened into a small clearing. On the far side, barely visible through the sleet and darkness, was the entrance to an old mine shaft. The wooden supports had mostly collapsed. The opening was small, dangerous. Ranger stopped at the entrance and barked. Once, sharp, commanding. "Willa," Greer called. "Willa Foster." Silence. Just the whisper of sleet against stone and the distant rumble of thunder. Then faint, almost lost in the storm. "Help." The voice was small, terrified, but alive. "We've got her," Greer said into the radio. "Old mine shaft approximately 200 yards northwest of the main trail. Send rescue equipment." She turned to the deputy. "Get the mother. Tell her we found her daughter." The young man nodded and ran back toward the staging area. Greer approached the mine entrance carefully. The opening was maybe 3 feet wide, partially collapsed, the darkness beyond absolute. She pulled out her flashlight and aimed it inside. 20 feet back, huddled against the rock wall, was a little girl. Blonde hair, pink pajamas soaked through. Shivering so hard her whole body shook. "Willa, my name's Greer. I'm here to help you, sweetheart." The girl's eyes were wide with fear. "I can't get out. I tried." The rocks fell. Greer studied the entrance. Unstable. One wrong move and the whole thing could collapse. She'd need to go in carefully, slowly. Ranger moved past her, squeezing through the opening with the flexibility of a much smaller dog. He approached Willa gently, his movements deliberate, non-threatening. When he reached her, he laid down beside her, pressing his body against hers, providing warmth, comfort, the same service he'd provided Greer 100 times. Willa's shaking slowed. She reached out with trembling fingers and touched Ranger's fur. "Good dog," she whispered. Ranger's tail thumped once against the stone floor. Greer smiled despite the tension. "He's not just good, he's the best. Now can you move your arms and legs?" "I think so." "Good. I need you to stay very still while I come in. Okay, can you do that for me?" Willa nodded. Greer handed her pack to Vernon. "If this collapses, pull me out." "Don't let it collapse," Vernon said. "Helpful." Greer entered the mine shaft on her stomach, distributing her weight as evenly as possible. The supports groaned. Dust rained down from the ceiling. Behind her, Vernon held his breath. It took maybe 3 minutes to cover 20 feet. It felt like hours. When Greer reached Willa, she did a quick assessment. No visible injuries. Responsive. Scared, but coherent. Mild hypothermia setting in, but nothing critical yet. "You're doing great, Willa. I'm going to pick you up now, and we're going to walk out together. Nice and slow. Ranger's going to go first and show us the way." "Okay. Okay." Greer lifted the girl carefully. She weighed maybe 60 pounds. Light, fragile. The same weight as the combat packs Greer used to carry, but infinitely more precious. Ranger stood and moved toward the entrance, testing each step before committing his weight. Greer followed, cradling Willa against her chest, murmuring reassurances, the same words she'd used with wounded Marines in the back of medevac helicopters. They were maybe 10 feet from the exit when the supports gave way. The groan was immediate, deafening. The ceiling began to collapse. Ranger bolted forward, clearing the entrance in a single bound. Greer ran her body curling around Willa, protecting the girl with her own mass. Vernon reached in, grabbed Greer's jacket, and pulled. They tumbled out of the mine shaft just as the entrance imploded behind them. Rock and timber crashed inward, filling the space where they'd been standing 3 seconds earlier. Greer lay on the ground, Willa still clutched against her chest, her heart hammering so hard she thought her ribs might crack. Vernon knelt beside them. "You okay?" Yeah, I think so." Willa was crying now, not from pain, from relief, from the pure, overwhelming emotion of being safe after hours of terror. Greer held her, rocking slightly the way she'd seen mothers do. "You're okay, sweetheart. You're safe now. Your mom's coming. Everything's going to be okay." Ranger pressed against them both, forming a warm barrier against the sleet. His breathing was calm, steady, grounding. By the time the rescue team arrived with medical equipment and the mother who ran through the forest like her heart was breaking, Greer had wrapped Willa in thermal blankets and started warming her core temperature. The girl would be fine. Cold, scared, but alive. The mother dropped to her knees, pulling her daughter into an embrace that looked like it might never end. "Thank you," she sobbed, looking at Greer over Willa's shoulder. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." Greer nodded, couldn't speak. The lump in her throat was too large. They walked back to the staging area as dawn broke pale and gray over the mountains. The sleet had stopped. The storm was passing. And for the first time since leaving the Navy, Greer felt something she'd thought was gone forever. Purpose. The sheriff met them at the trucks. "Hell of a job out there, both of you." He looked at Ranger. "Especially you, soldier." Ranger's tail wagged, slow, dignified. "We're just glad we could help," Greer said. Vernon put a hand on her shoulder. "Come on, let's get you warmed up, and then we've got a safe to open." They drove back to Vernon's place in silence. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving Greer exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical exertion. But beneath the exhaustion was something else, something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. When they pulled into Vernon's driveway, Greer's truck was already there, and leaning against it, smoking a cigarette despite the early hour, was Jolene. "Heard you found the foster girl," Jolene said. "Yeah, Ranger found her. We just followed." Modest, Jolene stubbed out the cigarette. "Town's talking about it already. How Elias's niece and that dog of hers saved a little girl's life. People are starting to remember what the Silverwood used to mean, what it could mean again." "I didn't do it for PR," Greer said. "I know, that's why it matters." Jolene looked at Vernon. "You ready?" Vernon nodded. He'd already loaded the welding equipment into his truck bed, cutting torch, acetylene tanks, safety gear. They drove to the Silverwood Inn as the sun climbed higher, burning away the last of the storm clouds. The hotel looked different in daylight, less ominous, more sad, a beautiful thing left to rot, but not for much longer. Vernon carried the equipment upstairs while Greer and Ranger secured the perimeter. Old habits from deployment. Clear the building. Check the exits. Make sure you're not walking into an ambush. The honeymoon suite looked exactly as they'd left it 2 days ago. The safe squatted in the corner like a challenge. Vernon set up the torch, adjusting the flame until it burned white hot. "This is going to take a while," he said. Elias didn't mess around. He started cutting. Sparks flew. Metal glowed red, then white, then began to separate. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. Greer and Jolene retreated to the hallway, letting Vernon work. Ranger stayed in the doorway watching, alert, like he understood the significance of what was happening. It took 90 minutes to cut through the welds. When Vernon finally pried the safe door open with a crowbar, the screech of metal on metal echoed through the empty hotel like a scream. Inside were stacks of documents, legal papers, property deeds, maps, and something else. Vernon pulled out a USB drive in a waterproof case. Attached to it was a note in Elias's handwriting. "Insurance, 2019. If they come for it, show them this." "What is it?" Jolene asked. Vernon plugged the drive into a laptop he'd brought. Files appeared, hundreds of them. Documents, emails, photographs, evidence. Proof that the Thorne family and their corporate partners had been illegally dumping mining waste into the Clearwater Valley watershed for 40 years. Proof of payoffs to regulators. Proof of covered-up illnesses. Proof of deaths attributed to natural causes that were anything but natural. "My God," Jolene whispered, "this would destroy them." Vernon scrolled through the files. This is what they wanted, what they've been trying to get since Elias sealed this safe. He must have gathered this evidence right before the fire. They tried to kill him to stop him from going public. Greer thought about Callum Thorne, the smooth voice, the threats, the desperation beneath the professional mask. "What do we do with it?" she asked. "We use it," Jolene said. "We give it to the right people. Environmental Protection Agency, federal prosecutors. We make sure the people responsible pay for what they've done." Vernon was still scrolling. "There's more here. Property documents, water rights, mineral rights." He stopped. "Greer, you need to see this." He turned the laptop. On the screen was a legal document, a deed transfer from the Clearwater Valley Mining Company to Elias Ashford, dated 1977. "He didn't steal the mineral rights," Vernon said quietly. "The mining company sold them to him voluntarily. Before the scandal broke, before anyone knew what was buried under this land." "Why would they do that?" Greer asked. Vernon pointed to a clause in the contract. "Because Elias agreed to never develop the land, never allow mining, never let anyone extract what was here. He turned the most valuable property in Idaho into a permanent nature preserve. And he did it legally. Binding contract, unbreakable." Greer felt something shift in her understanding. Her uncle hadn't been protecting treasure. He'd been protecting the land itself, the water, the forest, everything that made this valley worth saving. "Callum knows this," she said. "That's why he's desperate. If I claim the property, if I honor Elias's contract, there's nothing he can do. The lithium stays in the ground forever." "Not just lithium," Vernon said. "There's a clause here about water rights. Elias owned the aquifer. The same aquifer that supplies drinking water to 3 counties. If it's contaminated, if the mining waste gets into the water table." He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Ranger barked. Sharp. Urgent. Greer turned. Through the window she could see smoke rising from the forest. Dark. Thick. Not the white smoke of a campfire. Black smoke. Chemical smoke. Fire. "No," Jolene whispered. They ran downstairs. Outside, the wind had picked up, carrying the smell of burning timber and something else. Something toxic. Vernon pulled out his phone. No service. They were too deep in the mountains. "We need to get to town," he said. "Warn people. If that fire reaches the contaminated zones, if it burns through 40 years of buried waste." The sky was darkening. Not from storm clouds this time. From smoke. Ranger was already at the truck waiting. They drove toward Clearwater at dangerous speed, Vernon pushing his old truck harder than it should have gone. The smoke thickened as they descended from the mountains. By the time they reached the main road, they could see flames on the ridgeline. The fire was moving fast. Too fast. Driven by wind and fed by drought-dry timber. And it was headed straight for the valley. The staging area from that morning had transformed into a disaster response center. Fire trucks, emergency vehicles, people loading possessions into cars, the organized chaos of evacuation. The sheriff saw them coming and jogged over. "Where the hell have you been? We've been trying to reach you for an hour. Lightning strikes started a fire up on Black Ridge. It's out of control." The contaminated zones, Vernon said. If the fire reaches them, the sheriff's face went pale. What contaminated zones? Vernon looked at Greer. She made the decision in half a second. We have evidence, she said. 40 years of illegal dumping, toxic waste buried throughout the forest. If that fire burns through it, the smoke will be poisonous. You need to evacuate. Everyone, now. You're serious. Dead serious, and we can prove it. The sheriff pulled his radio, started barking orders. Evacuation expanded from voluntary to mandatory. Buses were dispatched to the nursing home, the school, every residence in the valley. How much time do we have? The sheriff asked. Vernon looked at the smoke. Maybe 4 hours, maybe less. Then we work fast. Greer spent the next 3 hours doing what she'd been trained to do. Triage, organize, keep people moving, keep people calm. The corpsman in her took over, pushing aside fear, pushing aside exhaustion, leaving only the mission. Get people out, get them safe. Do it fast. Ranger worked beside her, his presence calming frightened children. His discipline reminding panicked adults to think clearly. He'd done this before too, in villages under mortar fire, in compounds being overrun. The context changed, the mission never did. By mid-afternoon, most of the valley was empty. The caravan of vehicles stretched for miles, heading east toward Boise, away from the smoke and the fire and the toxic waste that might soon become airborne poison. Greer stood at the edge of town watching the last families leave. Jolene was with them, helping elderly residents into cars. Vernon had stayed behind working with the fire crews to establish containment lines. The smoke was closer now, thick enough to taste, thick enough to sting. That's when she heard it, a bark, urgent, panicked. Ranger was running back toward the Silverwood, running toward the fire. Ranger, no stop. The dog didn't stop, didn't slow. He disappeared into the smoke like a ghost. Greer didn't think, didn't calculate the risk. She just ran into the smoke, into the heat, following the sound of barking that was getting fainter by the second. The forest was chaos. Embers rained down like snow. The temperature climbed with every step. Greer's lungs burned. Her eyes watered. But she kept moving, following Ranger's trail through instinct more than sight. She found him at the hotel. The Silverwood Inn was burning. Not the whole structure, just one corner. But it was spreading fast, feeding on old dry wood and decades of dust. Ranger was at the basement entrance, the hidden passage they'd used days ago. He was barking at something inside, refusing to leave. Greer grabbed his vest. We have to go. Now, Ranger pulled free and ran into the basement. Damn it! She followed. The basement was filling with smoke. The air was thick, suffocating. Greer pulled her shirt over her mouth and moved deeper, following the sound of Ranger's movements. He was at the sealed wall, the one they'd found the first day. The concrete barrier that blocked whatever chamber lay beyond. And he was digging, clawing at the base where the concrete met the floor. His paws were bleeding, his breathing was labored. But he wouldn't stop. Ranger, please, we have to leave. The dog looked at her, and in his eyes, Greer saw something she'd never seen before. Desperation. She knelt beside him, felt along the base of the wall, and found it. A gap, small, maybe 6 inches wide, hidden beneath debris and dust. Ranger had known it was there, had probably known since the first day. He'd been waiting for the right moment to show her. Greer pulled the debris away. The gap widened. Behind it was darkness and cool air flowing from somewhere deep in the mountain. A passage, a tunnel, leading down. What's down there, boy? What did Elias hide? Ranger barked once and squeezed through the gap. Above them, something crashed. The ceiling was starting to collapse. Greer made the decision, right or wrong. Life or death, she went through. The passage was narrow, claustrophobic. It sloped downward into darkness that her phone's flashlight could barely penetrate. Ranger moved ahead, sure-footed like he'd walked this path before. They descended for maybe 50 feet. The air grew cooler. The sound of the fire faded to a distant roar. Then the passage opened into a chamber. Not the small round room from the tunnel entrance. This was bigger, ancient. The walls were stone, natural stone. Not carved by modern tools, but smoothed by water over millennia. And in the center, carved into the rock itself, was a spring. Clear water bubbling up from deep in the earth. The source, the aquifer Vernon had mentioned. The water that supplied 3 counties. Ranger approached the spring and drank. Then he looked back at Greer. This was what Elias had protected. Not minerals, not wealth, water, life. On the wall beside the spring was a plaque, bronze, weathered but readable. To those who come after this water is sacred. It sustained the first people of this valley. It will sustain the last. Protect it. Honor it. Never let greed poison what gives life. Elias Ashford, 1978. Greer understood now, all of it. The sealed wall, the welded safe, the decades of secrecy. Her uncle had discovered this spring, had realized the mining waste was seeping toward the aquifer, had spent his entire life making sure the contamination never reached this chamber. A crash echoed from above, louder, closer. They needed to leave. Now. Greer took one last look at the spring, committing it to memory, then turned back toward the passage. That's when the ceiling came down. The rumble started deep. Greer looked up just as the first support beam in the passage cracked. "Run!" she screamed. They bolted toward the passage entrance. Greer first, Ranger behind. The ceiling collapsed in sections. Dust exploded into the air. A massive timber beam broke free, falling directly toward Greer's back. She didn't see it coming, but Ranger did. The dog launched himself forward, slamming into Greer's legs, knocking her sideways. The beam crashed down where she'd been standing a half-second before, but it caught Ranger. The heavy timber pinned his hind legs. He yelped once, sharp, involuntary, then went silent. Discipline, even in pain. Ranger. Greer scrambled back, her hands finding the beam. Too heavy. She couldn't lift it alone. More debris was falling. The chamber was collapsing. Ranger looked at her, his eyes calm, accepting. "No, I'm not losing you," Greer said through gritted teeth. She wedged her shoulder under the beam legs, bracing, using every ounce of strength the Navy had built into her. Not today, not ever. The beam shifted, inch by inch. Ranger pulled himself free, dragging his back legs, clearly injured, but mobile. Greer grabbed his tactical vest and pulled him toward the far wall where she'd seen another opening earlier. They crawled through together, Greer dragging Ranger when his legs gave out. Ranger pulling himself forward when he could. Partners, the way they'd always been. Behind them, the main passage ceiling collapsed, completely sealing the sacred spring behind tons of rock. But they were through, in a new passage, alive. Greer collapsed against the stone wall, Ranger pressed against her chest. His breathing was labored, his back legs clearly damaged. "You saved me," she whispered. "Again." Ranger's tail thumped once against the ground, weak but present. They rested for 60 seconds. Then Greer stood, lifted Ranger carefully, 70 pounds of injured dog, and started moving upward through the passage. The new passage was rougher, less traveled, but it led upward, away from the chamber, toward what Greer hoped was another exit. She lost track of time. The passage twisted, branched. Ranger couldn't walk, but he lifted his head occasionally, guiding her with small movements. Left, right, straight. Then she saw it. Light, faint, gray, but real. They emerged from a crack in the rock face maybe 200 yards from the hotel. The Silverwood was fully engulfed now, flames reaching toward the sky. The structure collapsing in on itself with sounds like breaking bones. But the fire hadn't spread beyond the building. The crews had contained it. The contaminated zones remained untouched. Greer collapsed onto the grass, her lungs heaving, her body shaking. Ranger lay beside her, panting hard, his paws bloody, his vest singed, his back legs motionless. But alive. They were both alive. Vernon found them 10 minutes later. He ran across the clearing, his face streaked with soot, his eyes wide with relief and fury. "What the hell were you thinking?" he shouted. "Running into a burning building. You could have died." Ranger knew, Greer said between gasps. He knew about the chamber, the spring. That's what Elias was protecting. The water source. Vernon's anger faded. He sat down hard beside her. "The spring. Jesus, I'd forgotten. Elias showed it to me once, 40 years ago. Made me swear never to tell anyone. Said as long as people didn't know it existed, they couldn't try to take it. It's still there, still pure. The contamination hasn't reached it. Yet." "Yet," Greer agreed. They sat in silence, watching the Silverwood burn, watching decades of history collapse into ash and memory. But the land beneath remained. The forest, the water, the things that mattered. The sheriff approached, his expression grim. "We need to talk about this contamination, about the evidence you mentioned." Greer stood. Her legs were shaky but functional. "I'll tell you everything, but first I need to make a call." She found cell service at the edge of the clearing, dialed the number Vernon had given her days ago, the attorney in Boise. "This is Greer Ashford. I need to file a claim of ownership for the Silverwood property. Today. Right now. and I need to do it before Callum Thorne can stop me. The attorney's voice was crisp, professional. I can have the paperwork ready in 2 hours. I'll be there in 90 minutes. She hung up, looked at Ranger. The dog met her eyes, battered, bloody, unable to walk, but still here. We need to get him to a vet, Greer said to Vernon. There's one in town, good one. Treats working dogs. Vernon's voice was gentle. He'll take care of him. They loaded Ranger carefully into Vernon's truck. The dog whimpered once when they lifted him, then went silent. Discipline holding even through pain. The vet clinic was small but clean. The veterinarian, a woman in her 50s with steady hands and kind eyes, examined Ranger with the expertise of someone who'd worked with military dogs before. Fractured tibia, she said after x-rays. Clean break, treatable. He'll need surgery, but he'll walk again. Might have a limp, but he'll walk. Greer felt something break loose in her chest. Relief so intense it hurt. Do it, she said. Whatever he needs. It'll be expensive. I don't care. The vet smiled. He's a good dog. A hero from what I hear. Saved a little girl this morning. Now saved you. We'll take care of him. They prepped Ranger for surgery. Greer stayed with him until the anesthesia took hold, her hand on his head, whispering promises she intended to keep. Then Vernon drove her to Boise. They made it with 15 minutes to spare. The paperwork was signed, notarized, filed with the county recorder's office. By the time Callum Thorne learned what had happened, it was too late. The Silverwood Inn and the 40 acres surrounding it belonged to Greer Ashford. Legally, permanently, protected by the same contract Elias had signed in 1977. The USB drive went to the FBI, the EPA, the State Attorney General's office. Callum Thorne resigned 3 days later. No charges were filed, no public scandal, just a quiet exit from a man who'd finally run out of moves. The contamination cleanup would take years, decades maybe, but it would happen. The valley would heal. The water would stay pure, and the Silverwood would rise again. 6 months later, Greer stood in front of the construction site where the hotel had been. The old structure was gone, reduced to ash and memory in the fire. But in its place, something new was growing. Not a hotel, not anymore. A retreat center, specifically designed for women veterans. Women who'd served and come home carrying invisible wounds. Women who needed a place to heal that understood what they'd been through. The sign was already in place. Simple, honest, Silverwood Retreat, a haven for women warriors. The first residents would arrive next week. 12 women, 12 stories, 12 chances at healing. Vernon walked up beside her, leaning on a cane, now his limp more pronounced after months of hard construction work. But his eyes were bright, alive in a way they hadn't been in years. Elias would be proud, he said. I hope so. I know so. You finished what he started, and you're doing it better than he ever could have imagined. A van pulled into the driveway. The first arrival, early, eager, or maybe just desperate. The door opened. A woman in her 40s stepped out. Short hair, guarded eyes, the look of someone who'd seen combat and carried it home. She looked at the retreat center, then at Greer, then at Ranger, who'd wandered over to greet her with his usual professional dignity. He walked with a limp and now his right hind leg never quite straightening fully. But he walked. You the director? The woman asked. Yeah, Greer Ashford, Navy corpsman, Army, medic, 3 tours. The woman knelt, let Ranger sniff her hand. He's beautiful, working dog. Retired military K9 like me. Like all of us. The woman stood. So this place is real. It's actually for us. It's for us, Greer said. Come on, I'll show you your room. They walked toward the new building together. Vernon headed back to the workshop, and Ranger trotted between them, tail wagging, slowly guiding them forward. That evening, as the sun set over the valley, Grisha sat on the porch of her cabin. The new cabin she'd built on the edge of the property. Small, simple, home. Ranger lay beside her, his head resting on her lap, his breathing slow and steady. We did it, boy, she said quietly. We actually did it. Ranger's tail thumped once. Greer thought about the journey that had brought her here. The letter from a dead uncle. The bee who'd known the way when she didn't. The secrets buried in concrete and sealed in safes. The fire that had almost destroyed everything but instead had revealed the truth. And she thought about Willa Foster, the little girl who was home safe now because Ranger had refused to give up. Maybe that was the real lesson. Not about inheritance or mineral rights or corporate corruption. About refusing to give up, even when it would have been easier to walk away. Her phone buzzed, a text from Jolene. Town council meeting tomorrow. They want to name the new community center after Elias. Thought you should know. Greer smiled. typed back a reply. He'd hate that, but I love it. She put the phone away and looked out at the valley, the forest, the mountains, the land her uncle had spent his life protecting so that others could heal on it. Purpose, that's what this was. What it had always been. Not running from the past, running towards something better. She scratched behind Ranger's ears. The dog's tail wagged again, slow and content. You knew, didn't you? Greer said. From the very beginning, you knew what I needed before I did. Ranger lifted his head, looked at her with those wise brown eyes, and licked her hand once. Then he settled back down, his weight solid and warm against her leg. A friend, a partner, a guide through darkness into light. 6 months had passed since the fire. Since Ranger led her into darkness to find light. Since a little girl named Willa came home safe because a retired K-9 refused to quit. Greer thought about that often. How miracles worked. People expected lightning, thunder, dramatic interventions from heaven. But most of the time, miracles came quietly. Like a letter from a dead uncle who'd never stopped watching over her. Like a dog who knew the path before she did. Like the strength to stay when leaving would have been easier. Like clean water flowing beneath poisoned ground, protected by a man who died keeping it safe. That's how God worked, Greer had come to believe. Not by changing the world all at once, but by placing faithful companions beside us and waiting to see if we'd listen. She looked at Ranger sleeping peacefully on the porch despite the stiffness in his back legs. His injuries had healed as much as they would. He'd never run quite the same, but he didn't seem to mind. He'd done his job, saved his person. That was enough. A car pulled up the drive. Another resident. Another woman veteran carrying invisible wounds. Another chance at healing. Greer stood to greet her, Ranger rising to join her despite the effort it cost him. This was the work. This was the mission. Not running from brokenness, but building something beautiful from the pieces. The woman who stepped out of the car looked familiar.